Lawyers of Reddit. What was the best gotcha moment you ever experienced? Story 1. My client's house burned down from an explosion in the fuel oil tank used to heat the house. It was clearly the oil maintenance company's fault, but his homeowner's insurance, from a very reputable company, still refused to pay out, citing a ridiculous technicality in his policy. Essentially, the policy covered damage caused by the oil heater, but they claimed that it was the storage tank that exploded and wasn't part of what was covered. So they denied his claim, which was about $1.2 million. Then I get involved. During a deposition with the claims adjuster, I asked how she concluded that the storage tank was not a part, or at least connected to, the heater. She states that she relied on her quote-unquote expert witness who was an engineer. Little did she know I had already checked this person's background. He had zero engineering experience or education. As most of you might know, you don't get attorney's fees in most cases. However, when an insurance company denies your claim in bad faith, now you do. Her little admission cost the company about $500,000 in fees, on top of the original claim of $1.2 million. And this is why so many people try to screw insurance companies, because they're right there, trying to screw you too. Story 2. I had a former client file for bankruptcy, and in connection with that case brought an action against his landlord for violating the automatic stay. To prove damages, he wanted to show he paid my firm for legal fees in connection with the landlord's pursuit of rent in violation of the stay. So this former client's bankruptcy lawyer serves me a subpoena to show up at the bankruptcy hearing. He didn't ask me any questions prior, but just gave me the gist of what the objective was, i.e. verify with the court the time I spent and the cost to his client. The bankruptcy attorney called his client, my former client, to the stand first. He asked him questions related to his hiring my firm to do this, and that it is related to his landlord. Apparently that's not enough. The bankruptcy attorney wants me to verify these facts as well. I get put on the stand and I'm asked to verify the invoice. I first object to the question as a precaution since it may be a violation of attorney-client privilege to answer the question, and to cover me for any claim by the bar or my former client. As predicted, the judge overrules and orders me to answer. I review the invoice and answer, "No, this is not my invoice." His attorney, "I don't understand. This is your firm's logo and information, right?" Me, "Yes." His attorney, "And you provided these legal services, right?" Me, "No." A very confused attorney slowly started to put together, after a couple more follow-up questions, that this idiot client of ours had manufactured my invoice to prove his damages. Needless to say that I could have given his new attorney the heads up, but it wasn't going to help someone who had committed perjury to the court using my name. I had represented him in a completely different matter, and this guy was trying to make some extra cash through this bankruptcy hearing. 2 lessons. Tell your attorney everything, and as an attorney, make sure your client feels comfortable to tell you everything. Story 3. Cross-examining a custom home builder who had a lump sum contract, set price as opposed to cost plus, which means the cost of the materials plus X% as builder fee, with the homeowner. Claimed he put 20% more labor or materials into building the home than the contract provided for, and he was suing for these excess costs. I was asking him about an email with my client negotiating the price of the construction, and he volunteers that he knew he couldn't build it for that price. My head snaps up. My supervising partner's head snaps up. The opposing counsel goes pale. The dialogue was something like this. Me, "You quoted X price?" Builder, "Yes." Me, "You knew you couldn't build it for that price." Builder, "Yes." Me, "You knew the homeowner was relying on that quote." Builder, "Yes." Me, "You knew the homeowner wouldn't have signed the contract without that representation." Builder, "Yes." Me, "And you told homeowner's lender you could do it for X." Builder, "Yes." Me, "And the bank relied on that price and wouldn't have given a loan if they knew it was wrong." Builder, "Yes." This is textbook fraudulent inducement and he had no idea. The builder got poured out in the arbitration award and slapped the builder with sizable punitive damages on top of it. 5 minutes of testimony sunk his case because he volunteered information without being prompted. Story 4. Lady got into a minor fender bender with a truck in a casino parking lot. She backed out of a spot into him. My guy said she parked and went inside the casino for a few hours. At her deposition, she testified that she was so hurt she went right home and to a hospital. I asked if she was a frequent visitor of the casino and if she had a rewards card. She was happy to tell me she did and that she had gold status and showed me the card. I subpoenaed her rewards card records and it showed she was playing slots for hours after the accident. Story 5. I was trying to get a restraining order for a woman in domestic violence court from her son's father. We are presenting testimony and she details a story where he grabbed her arm and slammed it on the tub, breaking her wrist. On the cross, I asked the accused if he ever broke my client's wrist on purpose. His response was, "Fuck yeah, I did.
She was 9 months pregnant and about to smoke crack and wouldn't stop. I tried to grab her arm to get the pipe and protect my unborn son.
Fuck me. She left that detail out in her conversation with me. I guess you can be a bad guy without being a bad guy. Story 6. Plaintiff alleged he was so injured in an auto accident that he couldn't work, do any regular activities, or pick up his young kids. He then posted on his public FB profile him doing the ice bucket challenge. If you're not familiar, he basically lifted a huge cooler filled with ice water over his head. His attorney had no idea he had posted it. Story 7. Perhaps not my best, but it was recent and pretty good. I represented a guy whose car died in the middle of the freeway at 4 a.m. He put on his hazard lights and called 911 for help. At the same time, an LAPD cop heading to work around the same time in a police unmarked car was driving around 87 to 92 miles per hour. Per our deconstructionist, he doesn't see our guy, strikes him, and causes a major 6-car collision, including overturning an 18-wheeler truck. Police arrive and take photos. LAPD officer claimed our guy did not have his hazard lights on and he was only driving 60 miles per hour. He was trying to put some of the faults on our guy. At the deposition of the investigating officer, she doesn't remember if our guy's hazard lights were on or not. The attorney brings photos from the scene. One of the photos showed my guy's hazard lights on. We were dismissed shortly thereafter. Story 8. Not so much a gotcha as it is the defendant giving themselves up. When I worked for insurance defense, I handled the fraud case where a man reported his Rolex as being stolen. He was adamant that he was at a hotel and it was stolen. He has shown no proof of being in a hotel, so it's flagged. We went through the whole process and finally reached depositions. He gets sworn in and eventually let out that he wasn't at a hotel but rather with his mistress and he had left it at her house. His wife noticed he didn't have it on, so he immediately claims it must have been stolen, etc. This man decided to hire an attorney and go through this whole circus just so his wife wouldn't find out about his affair. Needless to say, the claim was denied. Story 9. Not a lawyer, but when I was in the military, I was accused of something I didn't do. They had to go to court over it. And during court, the prosecutor started to detail this investigation and how they had staked my apartment out for months. They entered into evidence a picture of my apartment, and when they put it up, I looked shocked at my lawyer because it wasn't a picture of my place. It was my ex-wife's apartment, a place I had never lived, never even spent a single night there. I lived in a house, she lived in an apartment. And when my lawyer was asked if she objected to the picture being entered into evidence, she replied, "I don't mind them entering it into evidence as long as they change the listing of it." And when one of the members of the panel, no judge, through member board, asked what was wrong with the listing, she looked at him and said, "That's not his apartment." On top of this, the witness they used against me described going to my house on the night in question, and she named the subdivision where she had visited me. Except that wasn't where I lived either. Also wasn't where the picture they had was either. The case was dismissed and I was told they requested the witness to return to answer questions about perjury. Story 10. I lived with a guy when we were in our early 20s. He worked for one of those shitty furniture rental places where people without money get furniture. Much of his job was repossessing furniture, and in his spare time he was a skateboarder. He severely hurt his back on the job. They were contesting paying his bills and settling. At one of his mediation dates, they revealed they had hired a private investigator to follow him. They showed him pictures of, quote-unquote, himself at a skate park skating when he was supposed to be home recovering. They asked him to verify it was him. He said no. These doofuses had somehow missed that he had a twin brother that also skated. They eventually settled for what I thought was a very low $70K. He had back pain for years that caused him to gain weight and suffer. In his 30s, he finally had back surgery, and he regretted not doing it 10 years earlier. He said it completely alleviated the pain. Story 11. Had a client accused of leading the cops in a high-speed chase. The cop on the stand estimated he was going 90 miles per hour, but never actually clocked him. Then the cop identified where the chase started with me and where it ended. It lasted about 2 miles. Then we went through his log of when it started and when it ended, about 3.5 minutes. Once you walk through the math on that, the average speed of this chase was 35 miles per hour. The client got acquitted really quick after that. So the cop did 90 miles per hour to catch up with the client and decided to call it a high-speed pursuit. Gotcha. Story 12. In the first case I ever did, opposing counsel misplaced a copy of my client's driver's license. Rather than admitting his mistake and asking me to rescind it, he filed a motion to compel, claiming we never sent it. Well, I was able to provide proof that we'd sent it to him like 8 months ago, so the judge was rather displeased with his antics. Story 13. Represented a DUI client who swore up and down to me he hadn't been drinking or doing any drugs. The newbie officer had his field training officer with him in the car. The rookie pulls the client over for a tag violation and walks back to the car with the body camera still on. Training officer says, "Get him out for a DUI." And the rookie says, "But he's not intoxicated." To which the reply was, "Do it anyway." Body cam clicks off, turns on 7 minutes later, and they're doing field sobriety exercises on my client. The client sat in custody for 3 weeks until I finally got the tape from the prosecutor and presented it to the judge. The "oh shit" look from the prosecutor and field training officer when the judge saw the tape. I'll treasure that one. The judge wrote the police chief a letter saying the FTO was dead to him and he denied every search warrant he tried to bring thereafter for being a liar. The client is hopefully still on track with a civil attorney in a lawsuit. I love body cams so very much. Story 14. My client was a woman working at a meat packing plant. Her glove, it would only give her the loose kind because they were cheaper, got caught in the machine and she lost her arm. We sued the owners of the plant for the glove issue. We also sued the machine manufacturer for failing to include the required guard. Then we sued the distributor for being in the chain of the sale but didn't really think they played much of a role. The manufacturer swore they included a handguard and said the plant owner must have used a grinder to take it off. During a deposition of the guy that owned the distribution company, he shows up with the sale documents he was supposed to have turned over weeks before. Turns out there was a note in small print at the bottom he didn't know about that said the sale was without the handguard, which is against the law. I pointed it out and we ended up settling that afternoon with the distributor. The woman got all her medical bills paid, got money for a prosthetic, and got a bunch of pain and suffering damages. Damn. All the money in the world does not replace a lost arm. Story 15. Worked as a paralegal or investigator, working on a trade secrets case involving the manufacture of dental wheels used to grind teeth. Long story, but go with it. Company Alpha was a small family-owned manufacturer that made the best product in the market from a small factory in the middle of nowhere. Sold massive amounts of product because of quality. Its location was remote enough and the owner paid employees so well the employees stayed there forever. All of them had worked there for 30 plus years. When the founder of Company Alpha died, it was sold to the international Company Beta because the kids and grandkids had no interest in the company. Company Beta then closed the old factory and tried to use Company Alpha's formula at their facilities. Company Beta couldn't make the formula work. Now enter Company Charlie. Another international company lost the bid on buying Company Alpha. When Company Charlie heard about the problems Company B was having, they bought the old factory facilities and then rehired the old staff to restart production. All the employees of the old Company Alpha were delighted to have their good-paying jobs back and went straight to work. Producing better quality items once again, and Company Charlie's product worked. Company Beta sues Company Charlie for trade secret violation. When you buy a company, you buy its trade secrets. And this company had a bunch. This product was just one part, but the most profitable part of their operation. Thus, Company Charlie, because of their action, was accused of violating the laws governing trade secrets. Company Beta even managed to get a temporary restraining order against Company Charlie in federal court, and Company Charlie had to stop manufacturing at the old plant now owned. This is where I enter the picture. Our firm represented Company Charlie, and I was assigned to interview all the employees. I was in the living room of this delightful older lady in her late 50s that offered me snacks, asked me if I was married, and wanted to set me up with a granddaughter, you name it. Best and funniest interview ever. Then she drops the bomb. I asked her how she knew how to make the product. All my previous interviews said so-and-so taught them. She said, from the directions on the wall. Total moment of silence. Directions on the wall? Yes, she said. No one ever looks at me, but there is a board on the wall with the directions. I called the janitor of the facility from her phone, yeah, this is before cell phones, and had him meet me there. He unlocks the place and yep, covered in probably 40 years of dust making it just part of the background, is a board with the entire process on it. Thus, when Company Beta sold the factory, which was eventually purchased by Company Charlie, Company Beta accidentally sold the trade secret to Company Charlie because they abandoned it on the wall. I did serious evidence sourcing on this. The best pictures were of the 65-year-old former janitor knocking the dust off the pages, taking the entire board off the wall, putting it in a paper bag, and sealing it so I never touched it. In every picture, he smiled at the camera. His "fuck you" expression was priceless in every picture. They were so freaking funny. The judge in federal court was laughing his ass off when he heard the detail of what I found to reverse the restraining order. When he opened the bag, he laughed even more. The factory reopened immediately. Companies Beta and Charlie settled by agreeing that they both got to use the trade secret but couldn't sell it to anyone else. What they really figured out was, those little old ladies had slightly changed the formula over the years and slightly made them better over time. Even the formula on the wall didn't work as well as these little ladies did. Story 16. My brother is an attorney. He had a case where the guy said he was permanently disabled from a work accident. At a deposition, my brother overheard the guy talking about getting his house remodeled. He was already spending the money he thought he was getting. My brother drove by the house to see how much work was being done and saw the guy carrying bundles of roofing shingles up a ladder to the roof. This was before smartphones, so he drove to Best Buy and bought a video camera, went back, and recorded the guy. He had copies made and sent to the other attorney. The guy dropped the suit and was back at work the following Monday. My brother's client didn't want to pay for the video camera. He saved them thousands of dollars. They eventually paid, but he still gets a little peeved when he talks about it. Story 17. I had a client whose $60K car was ruined by a shop that put in the wrong oil. We couldn't prove it at first. The engine blew up, oil leaked out, and evidence was lost. I subpoenaed their bank records and figured out they bought their oil from Costco. Called Costco and got their prices for the last 2 years. I then worked out the amounts they were spending, did some backhand math, and showed that based on the values, it was impossible they had ever bought the right oil. They settled in full immediately. You've got to admit, it is the most satisfying thing when the opposition caves in immediately when you prove what they're saying is impossible. Story 18. Not a lawyer, but a legal videographer. This gentleman was claiming injuries and seeking damages against his employer after a fall at work. He claimed he couldn't raise his right arm above his shoulder because of the fall. The first deposition comes along, and I'm hired by the defendant's attorney to videotape the deposition of the plaintiff. Does anyone know the first thing a court reporter asks you to do in a deposition? Please raise your right hand or repeat after me. Plaintiff raises his right arm above his shoulder with ease and no sign of discomfort. Does not occur to him what he had just done. Both attorneys were looking down at their notes when this happened, and neither of them caught it. The plaintiff himself didn't catch it. The court reporter looked at him and then looked at me, and then her eyes went wide with realization at what just happened. 4 hours of deposition proceed where the plaintiff is instructed, multiple times, to show his range of motion and proceeds to pretend like he can't raise his arm above shoulder level, which he did at the very beginning of his deposition. Deposition ends, plaintiff's counsel leaves. I call defense, hiring party, counsel over, and show him the first 2 minutes of tape. Counsel excitedly whispers to me, "Case closed. You just saved us tens of thousands of dollars." I got a $5,000 bonus and the plaintiff's case was dismissed with prejudice. $5,000 bonus? I should get into legal videography.
Lawyers have read it. What was your hold it moment where you knew you would win? Story 1. I'm not a lawyer, but a friend of mine was a driving while intoxicated DWI attorney in New York for a while. He was defending a guy who was asleep in the backseat of his car while intoxicated, and a New York State NYS trooper arrested him. On the stand, the trooper testified that he visually saw the key in the ignition. My friend gave him 3 chances to walk it back. "Are you sure, trooper, that you actually saw the key in the ignition?" Yes, counselor. When a cop calls a lawyer counselor, he really means ass. And then my buddy dropped the hammer. "You are aware that my client drives a Toyota Prius." Bam. My buddy moved for immediate dismissal and the district attorney, or DA, didn't argue. Case dismissed. Nothing happened to the trooper. As to why this trooper did this? Promotions and overtime. Imagine you're running the entire New York State Police. You have about 5,000 troopers. What metric do you use to gauge how effectively they're performing their tasks? For the most part, troopers ride alone. So trooper number 1 drives around all day on a shift and issues 0 tickets and makes 0 arrests. Trooper number 2 manages to issue, say, 5 tickets a day and makes a DWI arrest 4 times a month. You're going to assume that trooper number 2 is doing his job. An aggressive officer is one that has a lot of tickets and a lot of arrests. Also, court appearances are almost always on overtime. Police unions are very specific about overtime pay rates and when they apply. If you're an effective trooper and you write lots of tickets, you're going to be in court a lot, at 1.5 your hourly rate, sometimes twice your hourly rate, depending. Story 2. Not a lawyer, but got robbed at gunpoint in my home. Long story short, he would have gone to prison anyway, but the kicker is that the shoes he wore to court were the same shoes he stole from my house. Judge asked if I wanted them back. I said yes. Judge made him take them off in court and walk back in socks. Donated the shoes. It was more about the principle. Story 3. I had a client charged with battery. The alleged victim didn't really support the prosecution's case and in any event was reluctant to testify. I still had another witness though, and she said that my client was hitting the alleged victim so it wasn't looking great. The prosecutor and I were talking before court started, hanging out by the courtroom doors when the witness walked in. She looked right at my client, who was sitting not 5 feet from me, then scanned the room and said, "Where's the client?" The prosecutor and I looked at each other for a minute, and then he said he needed to check on something. When I saw him a few minutes later, he told me he was dismissing the case. Story 4. I was testifying for the defense. A young man had been arrested for assaulting a police officer, allegedly throwing some bottles during some unrest in Oakland following the verdict and the trial for the cop who shot Oscar Grant in the back on the Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART, platform. He had been there filming stuff, caught his arrest on video, and his brother found my footage on YouTube and asked me to testify. I had only seen bottles being thrown from this one corner of a parking lot from behind me. with the bottles flying over my shoulder. The defendant was in a group in front of me. On the stand, the prosecutor seemed to think I knew the defendant and was there basically committing perjury on his behalf. I explained why I had been there that night, that I have never seen this guy before, hadn't been coached by the defense, and hadn't been paid other than a small amount for my travel and time. Finally, exasperated after much back and forth, the prosecutor says, "Well, if you don't know the defendant, then why are you here testifying for him?" I thought for a moment and said, "I guess I just wouldn't want an innocent man to get convicted for a crime he didn't commit." He got visibly flustered and quickly moved on, trying to insinuate that if I didn't know him, how would I have known to be looking in his direction to see whether he was throwing things? I tried explaining that if you're looking at a group of random people and one of them throws something, you will naturally fixate your attention on that person. But because nobody in that group threw anything, there was nothing to notice in the first place. It looked like the police just grabbed him at random. They arrested. The defense attorney brought me to lunch down the street, and then he got a call from his colleague that the jury took all of 10 minutes to return a not guilty verdict on the assault charge. They said my response was legendary, though, and that no attorney should ever ask a question they don't already know the answer to. This guy just seemed to have a narrative about a prior relationship with the defendant that he assumed was accurate, and was trying to call my credibility into question. Story 5. We had some huge issues with the landlord, trying to enter without letting us know beforehand, not answering to fix issues, very aggressive when talking with us, when he decided to sell the place. He didn't check with us about the visits and just showed up randomly with potential buyers. We told him to get lost, and he eventually left but called us the same evening to threaten us. We sent emails to remind him of our rights as tenants, and he answered by threatening us more in an email. We eventually end up in small issues court, not from the US, don't know the name, and he fabricates a story about how we're terrible tenants and we try to discourage buyers. We just showed the judge the emails as well as the open complaint to the police we filed a few days earlier. The judge couldn't believe it and gave him a formal warning and gave us 3 free months of rent. In the end, the guy just used a real estate company to sell the place. All went smoothly, and we still live there with lovely landlords that aren't completely bonkers. Story 6. My client was riding his motorcycle on a relatively calm street when this guy exited his garage without looking and run over him. In the deposition, the guy brought a witness that was with him in the passenger seat. The whole time, the witness maintained that my client was driving too fast and that there was no time to brake the car. I asked him the same question a few times in different ways, making him tell the story again. In the fourth telling, he, already a bit frustrated, let it slip. "Look, I've already told you. We were exiting the garage, and as soon as I lifted up from getting my cell phone on the car's carpet..." Wait, so you didn't even see the crash? There was no coming back from that. Story 7. I had a client who was accused of taking a young woman's car and then crashing it and fleeing the scene. The girl testified at trial that she had given him the keys that night because she was drunk and would never ever drink and drive. Apparently, she was not aware that I had requested and obtained a copy of her driving record, which showed she received a DUI a month after the incident. I still remember the look on her face when I handed her driving record to her and said, "Except for that one time you got caught a month later, right?" The look on the judge's face was equally memorable. Story 8. I trapped a defendant pretty badly one time. He testified in a depot he had a green arrow for his left turn and that my client ran the red. Unfortunately for him, the additional turn lane arrow was installed 2 months after the wreck. The case settled for policy limits a week later. Not a court case, but your story reminds me of an accident I was a passenger in. A woman illegally turned at an intersection. There was a sign for a turn-on arrow only, and hit the car I was in as we were crossing through. We pulled into a nearby parking lot and we were exchanging information. The woman was freaking out and in tears, and me and the driver were just standing there uncomfortable. An uninvolved person saw that and apparently saw the woman crying, and 2 big guys there decided that meant we were bullying her. She comes up and starts screaming at the driver and says she's a witness and it's all his fault for running a green light, aka driving through the intersection. Story 9. I'm not a lawyer, but I took my old landlord to court when I was in college. They stole my security deposit over crap. They claimed I trashed the place, not knowing that I took pictures and video when I moved in and out. Their evidence was a VHS quality recording of going through a perfectly clean apartment in better condition than it was when I moved in, but then they opened up the top of the stove and found a single piece of elbow macaroni under it, holding it up triumphantly. That was the crux of their argument. The judge was not amused, and I got all my money back plus my lawyer fees and the filling fee. She then fought against her own lawyer to avoid paying him. Weird. Anytime you move into a place, take pictures, take a video, and make notes about any damage. When you move out, do the same thing along with noting any repairs you made. Pretty hard to argue against solid evidence. Protect yourself. Story 10. I was reviewing the transcript of an interview with a child. The child made incriminating statements against my client. At one point, when discussing the allegations, the child used an odd word, but I didn't think much of it. A few days later, I was watching a video of the child interacting with their grandmother, who hates my client, from about a week before that interview. The grandmother used the exact same odd word in the exact context the child later used it. At that moment, it became clear that the child had been coached. It was the first real aha moment in my career. My blood boils when people coach children and use them in this way. You're a disgusting piece of crap to use a child like this. No one ever knows if a child is lying or telling the truth moving forward, which makes them so vulnerable. And the kid themselves is just destroyed by the lie. Sometimes they start to believe the lie. People suck. Story 11. I worked on a case involving defective processors. In discovery, we got emails from the defendant's engineers that had worked on the processors. They were in an Asian country, but the emails were in English because they were going to the US executives. One of the more senior engineers basically laid out the exact defect we were suing over, explaining what the problem was and why it was their fault, and finishing with, "This is a big problem. We ship crap to the customer." Needless to say, we hit them over the head with that in mediation, and they settled shortly after. Story 12. Not a lawyer, but I played one in small claims court. My lease had an exit clause that said if I fronted 2 months' rent, they would work to lease my place and return anything unused. I checked with the office ahead of time and they assured me there was a waiting list, so I gave them 2 months and moved. They never returned a dime. I talked to the new tenant and confirmed they moved in a week later. In court, the judge was commenting on how he didn't see anything explicitly saying they would return any unused rent, even though that intent was stated to me a few times. Dumbo from the leasing office piped in with, "Your Honor, in almost every case we can return some money, but in this case we didn't have a tenant in the 2 months after he left." So she gave the case back to me and I presented the affidavit from the new tenant confirming the move-in date. The judge awarded me double what they owed. Turns out leasing office Dumbos 1 and 2 thought they could lie to me and return my excess rent money to themselves. Story 13. It was my 3rd month of practice. I was in family law at the time, representing mom in a petition for a restraining order against boyfriend and dad. At issue in the broader case was child visitation, custody, support, etc. But today's hearing was just on the restraining order. We had pretty good facts, but it was mostly based on the testimony of the parties. My client was way more reputable as a witness, so I was feeling confident. 10 minutes before the hearing, my client shows up. I give her a last-minute prep on what to expect, and then she says, "I'm glad I'm going through with this. I can't deal with it anymore, and it's just getting worse. To top it off, he left me a drunken, ranting voicemail on Saturday." "You have your phone with you?" "Yes." We play the voicemail and it's a full 2 minutes of ex-boyfriend screaming like, "I should have freaking killed you when we were together. You were always such a witch. I hope you burn to death in a fire." I didn't have time to ask her why the hell she hadn't said anything to me about the voicemail before the bailiff called her case. We sit, the judge asks if either side has additional evidence, and I ask for permission to play the voicemail. The ex-boyfriend, who didn't have an attorney, didn't object, so I played the whole nasty 2-minute rant in open court. Judge goes, "We're going to take a brief recess before I issue my ruling. If the parties want to meet and confer in the hall, they're welcome to." The boyfriend knew he was f***ed. We settled the whole damn case then and there. My client got her wish list in terms of custody, supervised visitation, child support, plus the restraining order to boot. Story 14. I'm a trial lawyer. I have a ton of these. My favorite was probably driving under the influence, DUI, when the cop was in a Buffalo Wild Wings with my client watching a fight. Like, the cop was standing at the bar in full uniform, then when my client walked by him to leave, followed him out. The client was only actually going to his car to grab his phone charger because he was going home with a bartender, like he hadn't even closed his tab yet. Cop arrested him and charged him with a DUI for opening his car door, then fabricated this story for his report about how the client got in the car, turned it on, and began to pull out of the space to leave the parking lot. He also denied being inside the Buffalo Wild Wings, on the stand under oath, to my face. Surprise, I talked to the bartender at Buffalo Wild Wings and got the security tape. It very clearly, like surprisingly good quality, don't try to steal from the restaurant by the way, showed a cop standing at the bar, watching my client walk out the front door, then follow him 30 seconds later. The parking lot camera also showed client barely touched the door handle before the cop stopped him. Cops don't need a reason to lie about what you say, do, or didn't say or do. I read hundreds of police reports, none of them are 100% honest. Cops lie under oath all the time. This story is just fun because I got to prove him wrong and save my client from a conviction. If you're stopped by a cop for any reason, make sure you know your rights. Do not offer information. Do not consent to a search. Do not have lengthy talks without a lawyer present or asking if you're under arrest. Story 15. Not a lawyer. Years ago, I had to do something at a strip mall in a bad part of town. Took me about 20 minutes, and then I found that my car had been towed. Uber to the tow yard. The giant sign says, cash only. Had to call another Uber, drive to the ATM and back, and pay them 300 some bucks. Got a shitty handwritten receipt that, believe it or not, was itemized. Went home, Googled, and found that they violated the law in 3 separate ways. Towed illegally refused to accept credit cards, and had multiple charges that the law called unreasonable, like dolly fees and load and unload fees. Took them to small claims court. The judge began by asking the tow yard owner about his relationship with the property owner and how the decision was made to tow my car. "Oh," the slimy tow truck dude answered. "My cousin works there. If he says tow, I tow. It's 100% legal." The judge's eyebrows began to raise. "But," the dude continued, "but what I detest the most, Your Honor, is this claiming I don't take credit cards. I'm a businessman. I take credit cards all the time. He's a lowlife that doesn't have any credit cards. That's why he wanted to pay cash." I was having a hold it overload, and the judge saw me smiling and hopping in my seat and patting my manila folder of receipts. "Do you actually not have any credit or debit cards?" the judge asked me. I pulled out my wallet and showed him, and then I pulled out a time-stamped photo of the cash-only sign I took the day of, and another one I took the morning of the hearing. The guy mumbled something like, "Okay, you got me there," and then had nothing but, I didn't know that." When the judge asked him about the legality of each unreasonable itemized charge. Anyway, each violation pays double the total tow charge, and since there were 3, that's how I made $1,800 on a $300 investment. Story 16. My client was accused of brutally murdering a dog. Cop testified that there was no testing of the blood, no body ever found, and admitted it could have, in fact, run away. The eyewitness said she could see the killing down the hallway from the dining room. Cop testified there was no hallway and the dining room was on a different level of the house than the killing supposedly took place. Then the person who was leading the lynch mob against my client around town for the last year testified that she had been in the apartment between the 2 visits by the cop to evaluate the scene. Nobody, a compromised crime scene, witnesses who couldn't see anything, an admission that there was no proof the dog was dead. The closing argument lasted 3 seconds. "Your Honor, I'm asking for an acquittal." Story 17. Not a lawyer, but we had no evidence that the woman who slammed into my stopped car going 85 miles per hour was drunk, until she indignantly admitted it on her tape in her deposition. She busted into my deposition and demanded she goes first because I was a lying witch. She excitedly told my lawyer that the police report was wrong because it said she was coming from the movie theater when she was actually coming from her friend's bar. "Did you have anything to drink at your friend's bar?" "Of course." "How many drinks?" "I don't know, they just keep my glass full." "Did you take any medicine that day?" "Methadone and low blood pressure medicine." "I see." The cops had refused to breathalyzer her at the scene because her husband was a firefighter that they knew personally. They told her to go home, sober up, and go to the hospital later. I heard the whole thing but had no proof until she handed it to me. They settled the same day. Story 18. It's not exactly a knew you would win moment, but I got a hidden shout out from a federal judge in a ruling that I consider to be one of the high points of my career. Here's what happened. Before a hearing for an emergency injunction against the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, I was watching the hearing before mine, a trademark infringement case. At the end of that hearing, the judge accidentally used a pun and could not stop laughing. She was literally crying. I decided at that moment I was going to intentionally use a pun in my hearing. I did. I accused USDA of engaging in a shell game by illegally diverting some federal funds to an egg industry trade group. The judge called me on it but laughed heartily. My client won. The judge threatened to put the Secretary of Agriculture in jail. A major newspaper reporting on the case said the judge winced at my puns but agreed with my arguments. False. When the written ruling was issued, the last sentence said that an injunction was issued against USDA's use of the funds for any plans they may be hatching. Undeniable shout out. Story 19. I can't believe I'm about to use the not a lawyer, but here goes. Tried to sell my home myself and the buyers wanted a term period for a land contract before getting their own mortgage. I agreed to 1 year and had a simple contract drawn up, and after we both signed it, everything seemed fine. Within 30 days, they presented me with their own legally drawn-up land contract that was pages long to protect their investment. On page 3, it very clearly stated that, if for any reason the home burns down, the purchaser will receive all insurance proceeds. First, I still had a mortgage, and the proceeds would legally go to pay that off. Second, that's a pretty targeted thing to say. Now, lawyers' terms of the house being destroyed and is surrounded by woods and waterways, just if it burns down. Page 4 stated that this would remain a land contract until my mortgage was paid in full, so they'd never buy outright. I returned it to them with a letter stating those two things were never happening and I wasn't signing. They stopped paying, so I began eviction. 6 months later, the lawyer I hired was an idiot, and I'm sitting down with our lawyer myself. He brings out the contract they tried giving me and began talking about their ironclad case due to the agreement. I asked him to show me my signature, the look on his face when he realized it wasn't there. After we talked, it turned out he knew them and wrote the contract without the burn the house down stipulation. Seems they added it, and under the belief it was a long-term land contract. Not only did I win, I'm pretty sure they lost a lawyer friend. Story 20. Not a lawyer. I was a volunteer family advocate. I worked with families who were falsely accused of child abuse. Part of that was going to court with them. I was contracted by a family whose children were in foster care because of parental drug use. The family claimed that they didn't do drugs and that no one would believe them. They had a court-appointed attorney who did nothing but tell them to stop using drugs. They honestly didn't believe them. I was pretty jaded. I told them to request their case file for me to review. I was surprised when they called me back and had the case file. I met with them and went through everything. I noticed claims of drug use and court findings of drug use, but no test results in the paperwork. I told them to ask for the results. Long story short, the caseworker wouldn't give them the actual results and the lab wouldn't either. So I tested them myself at a different lab. They tested clean. Color me shocked. There were 4 months to go until the next court date. Every time Child Protective Services tested them, they went right to the other lab and did a second test. All clean. I told them to tell the lawyer beforehand that if Child Protective Services claimed any dirty tests, to ask in court for the test results. He didn't want to. I was starting to get mad. So on the day of court, I had a stack of clean test results in my bag. The lawyer wouldn't even look at them, and he was openly hostile to my presence and involvement. Court starts. I had been in this judge's courtroom before with other families. The Child Protective Services supervisor stands up and says the parents have had 12 dirty screens in the past 6 months. The lawyer actually did ask her for the results. She said she didn't have them with her. I got the results out of my bag and handed them to the mom who was next to the lawyer. She tried to get him to take them, but he ignored her. I got so agitated that the judge said, "Mrs. Baez looks like she's about to have a stroke. What's going on?" I stood up and explained that we had clean tests taken immediately after the mandated ones that Child Protective Services claimed were dirty. I briefly explained that the parents had tried getting copies of their results and had been refused. I said that the parents had consistently denied ever using drugs and had clean tests to prove it. The judge ordered Child Protective Services to provide copies of all the test results at a hearing in a week. At that hearing, the case was closed and the children were released from foster care. The family never got an apology from anyone, but they were too traumatized to pursue it. They packed up and moved away within a month. Story 21. Very abbreviated. I was prosecuting a convenience store owner for luring a young girl, who regularly came into the store, back to a part of the store to grope and fondle and kiss her. Child enticement. It was the only section of the store without surveillance camera coverage. They were in the back room for about 2 minutes and 17 seconds, per the timestamp on the videos. Of the many arguments the defense put on, one was there was no way there was enough time for anything to happen. In my rebuttal and closing, I asked the jury to imagine what could happen in the room in that amount of time. And I asked them to all close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch in silence. After about 60 seconds, 2 of the jurors started crying. Knew it was going to be guilty right then. Story 22. I knew the cops beat up my client and framed him. They described a knife in his possession that caused them to fear for their safety. Oddly, they never seized it. We won the criminal case and filed a civil rights case. While deposing one, he described the knife in detail. No more than 3 minutes later, he slipped up and claimed his partner told him my guy had a knife, but he never saw it himself. I told him, "That's not what you just said," and saw him panic. His lawyer panicked too and asked to see me outside. When we got in the hallway, I withdrew my settlement demand and the case settled for a substantially larger amount within 45 minutes. Story 23. Not a lawyer, but I'm currently in a custody battle. Mother is saying I can't be trusted because I've been refusing to take our child to the therapist. The therapist testified I couldn't bring our child in because therapy must have both parents' consent, and the mother has retracted consent. "Your Honor, he won't bring our child to a therapist because he can't." Why is that? Because, Your Honor, I won't let him.
Lawyers have read it. What was your "oh, I'm definitely winning this one" moment? Story 1. I can't really say I'm proud of this one. It's not a happy case, but it was a pretty sure winner. I presented a client once who had gone through a really rough marriage and divorce several years prior. Child owned, a couple of miscarriages. The wife developed postpartum on one, which amplified an existing mental illness. An incredibly sad story. At the time I came into the story, the ex-wife had been in jail for several years, stalking her ex-husband initially, but was still being held because she wasn't competent to stand trial. And I was representing the ex-husband, who just wanted authorization to take over the sale of the house so they could finally finish severing ties. Prior to the trial, the wife's pro se briefs made it seem like she was under the impression they were going to relitigate the divorce, filled with allegations related to the marriage itself. As I said in the previous thread, she already had mental problems, and it was clear she'd picked up some tendencies during her ongoing incarceration. When it actually came to trial, and she was brought in, you could tell she was clearly not well. She was having a conversation with herself while my client was on the stand giving his explanation of the situation. We didn't really have any witnesses to speak of. This was hardly a major matter, so the ex-wife gave her side after that, and that's when the wheels fell off. She basically went on like she had in her briefs, rambling about the divorce itself, claiming my client had committed adultery, and therefore she was entitled to 100% of all the assets, aforementioned stuff, and some general babbling, etc. The judge we had was a nice guy, for which I'm forever grateful. He was patient with her, kind, and reminded her that the initial divorce wasn't the issue, but generally just let her continue to speak her piece for a bit. After a few minutes, he gently shut her down, had the bailiff and guards lead her away, and gave us authorization. Like I said, it's not a happy, "oh Lord, we're so going to win this" case. Just a sad situation, but it was probably my surest winner, other than default judgments. Story 2. The client was a private shuttle bus company that was contracted by the publicly funded regional transit company to pick up elderly and disabled customers, done on a reservation system. The client was sued by a woman alleging that the client didn't pick her up when she called, which was true. She would never make a reservation, instead treated the service like a taxi, and as a result, she had to hitchhike into town and stay in a shelter overnight. She claimed that at the shelter, someone bit a chunk of her arm off and sued the client for $25,000, small claims maximum. I brought an application to dismiss before this went on trial on the basis that the woman's claim was bound to fail. Google the doctrine of remoteness, among other things. At the application, the woman wore short sleeves. Her arms appeared unbitten. Signal 1, this was going my client's way. She argued that the claim wasn't really about the money or the chunk missing from her arm, but instead she just wanted the judge to order that my client pick her up whenever she calls. Signal 2. Admitting your claim is bogus to the judge is not a good strategy. I obviously objected and argued that this was not the case she brought, and that the judge must dismiss it. The judge said to the woman, "I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Dorcas. What would you say in response to his submission?" The woman then lost it on the judge. Signal 3. Called her a racist. That's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. Yelled and swore at her, and said her human rights were being violated. The judge was visibly pissed and ordered the woman's case dismissed. I could see the judge gritting her teeth, so I decided to swing for the fences. I asked for an additional order that the woman not be allowed to start any other action against my client without first getting permission from the court. Essentially, I asked for an order that is usually awarded against people who repeatedly and baselessly sued the same defendant. This was the first time the woman sued my client. The judge agreed that such an order would be appropriate and granted it on the spot. I don't think it helped that the woman was continuing to swear at me and the judge throughout this time. Story 3. Not a lawyer, of course, but I lived in a house with a slumlord property manager. Everything looked okay when we moved in, but we noticed a leaking spot in the ceiling. They just came and painted over it, multiple times. We learned after the fact that half the house didn't even get air conditioning and had no air circulation, with windows nailed shut. After a year, my daughter developed asthma. My son had chronic sinus infections, and my husband had headaches and were sick every month. We also began to have issues with bugs no matter what we tried. I sent the kids off to their dads, and my husband and I pulled our crap apart. We found mold on everything. Nothing in a visible place because I clean a lot. But once we pulled back the furniture band mattress, it was everywhere. I took pictures and had excellent documentation of our landlord's less than stellar attention. We broke our lease and moved out with their approval versus having them put us in a hotel. We threw away so much crap, all of which was documented. They tried to hit me with a $3,000 bill saying we ripped doors out. Doors I had pictures of being full of mold inside. I had about 100 pictures and about 30 pages of documents. They tried to say we trashed the place. My lawyer sent theirs just a few images and email transcripts, and I had my deposit back a week later. My lawyer said the only reason he took my case was because of all the documentation I provided. Story 4. Not my case, but during my aunt's divorce, custody case. Wasn't really one hearing per se, but over multiple hearings. My aunt wanted full custody of the kids. She initially had custody, but my uncle was allowed to see the kids every other weekend under supervision. Uncle was abusive and nasty even to the kids, and even under supervision. Social services reported his behavior at the hearings. He was rude and arrogant to the judge, wouldn't listen, and even walked out on a few occasions. Even his barrister thought he was a piece of crap. He made it obvious he didn't give a crap about the kids, and he and his mother declared on a few occasions that the kids were a result of incest between their mother and her father. Yeah, he dug his own grave with that one. Judge ruled that normally the father will get some custody, but at least he was making an exception and banning him from coming near the kids until they were 18. Aunt got full custody. Story 5. I'm an appellate criminal defense attorney, which means I take the case after the defendant has been convicted or sentenced, and I try to convince a court of appeals that he deserves to be released from prison, get a new trial, or get a new sentence. I had one case a few weeks ago that was a total travesty of justice. A black client tried by an all-white jury, not even a single minority in the entire veneer, defended incompetently by a crappy trial attorney who did absolutely nothing for him, who then got convicted on all accounts and received an extremely high sentence for a relatively piddling fraud, higher than Manafort got. I raised 5 different issues on appeal, which is a lot. Typically, I keep it to 1 issue or maybe 2. At the oral argument, the judges on the panel seemed pretty sympathetic during my presentation, though they asked me some tough questions. After I sat down, the government lawyer went up to speak. Before she got a word out, the first thing the judge said was, "This is like a law school exam. There are so many issues here." I had a pretty good feeling I'd win after that one. And indeed, they ended up revising all of his convictions, and my client is now a free man. Story 6. Not me, but my bro managed to force a major bank into the discovery process in a lawsuit, which is totally unheard of due to arbitration laws. The bank's agents had ripped off a wealthy old lady of all her money, and she didn't know anything until her lights were cut off. After fighting and delaying discovery until the very last minute, the bank dumped 200+ quote-unquote boxes of documents on my brother the Friday before the Monday discovery hearing. He had 72 hours to go through tens of thousands of pages of documents. He rented himself a hotel for the weekend so he'd have no disturbances, had a friend bring a dolly and hand truck the boxes to the room, and got to work. In one of the boxes was an email between 2 VPs at the bank discussing how there would never be a discovery process, so there was no need to destroy the documents, or evidence, and also saying that they weren't worried about the little old lady's lawsuit since the bank had frozen her accounts on some trumped-up fraud allegation, so she wouldn't be able to pay her lawyer and he, my brother, would surely quit. The lady had Alzheimer's at a fairly advanced stage by this time, so the email discussed how she would likely die before her accounts would be unfrozen once the fraud was proven to be false. These chuckleheads openly discussed several illegal acts in emails to each other, and when failed to destroy the paperwork providing they had actually undertaken those acts, which legally they could have destroyed at the time, but they were so arrogant they thought they didn't have to. When my brother entered into that evidence Monday morning, they immediately motioned for a recess and offered to settle for an undisclosed sum. He also won his client $10 million in a separate part of the lawsuit. One agent is currently serving a long sentence in the same federal prison as Bernie Madoff. Sadly, the lady did in fact die before the case was settled, so the money went to her son and to a large charitable trust that then elected my brother as the main trustee. So he gets to disperse the money he won in the settlement and see a lot of people benefit from his work. Pretty sweet. Story 7. Family law case. I'm just a paralegal, but I accompany the lawyers to court, or did anyway. Woman. Our client is divorced. The father is not paying child support. He is always claiming poor mouth, saying he has no money, etc., always getting extensions to his money owned. He had a business but said it was going terribly and he was owing money left and right, etc. The judges had been sympathetic in the past. However, the guy comes in, he owes $36,000 now for 5 or 6 years back child support, claiming poor mouth once again. Swears to the court he has no money, business isn't going well, shows bank statements. The attorney whips out a Facebook post copy I found, my brightest moment. Guy's young hot fiancé with her new $20,000 ring, 5.5 carats, and her post saying, "Look what my sugar daddy bought me." And he paid cash. Eat your heart out, ladies. The guy looked like his life had ended. We got our full amounts plus interest, and I got a $1,000 bonus. Turns out he was taking business money and never depositing it, so it would show on the books. So the company looked like it was doing terrible when in fact it was doing great. In a later investigation, his business partner sued him and won, and the business went under. For those asking, it was a bar room. And also, I hate family law. It's usually that the scumbag wins or gets away with crap for so long, male or female. Story 8. Worked as a prosecutor and was handling an involuntary commitment hearing. This is hearing when someone is mentally ill, and another, usually a family member, has filed a petition with the court asking for the mentally ill person to be committed for medical treatment when they are a danger to themselves or others. The judge would always make everyone wait for at least 15 minutes before he entered the courtroom. The judge spent at least 5 of those minutes adjusting his toupee. The lady, the one being committed, was wearing only a blanket as she refused to wear clothing. During the 15-minute wait, she was screaming at me, calling me every racial insult she could. The judge walks in, and suddenly her attention turns to the judge's toupee, starts laughing and insulting him, asking why he had roadkill on his head. After 5 minutes of ranting, her attorney turns to me. We are sitting next to each other, not more than 2 feet apart, and asks me to move to have her removed. I said no. She was proving my case for me. After a couple more seconds, I had a change of heart. I felt bad and made a motion to have the lady removed. She kept going on and on. She was taken back to the detention facility by the sheriff's deputy. The lady's husband then testified as to why she was a danger to herself. I don't remember the specifics. There was also a doctor's report submitted. In case anyone asks, this was 20+ years ago. She was sent to the state mental hospital for 7 to 14 days. I don't remember the exact time, but it is a temporary order, and there has to be a review in a short time to see if the committee should be longer or if the person should be released. She came back to court after having been medicated, and she was a really sweet old lady. She had severe mental problems that required her meds to be adjusted. She was fine, smiling, and in a really good mood when she came back to court. Her husband was really happy to see her again and was relieved she was back to her normal state of health. Story 9. Not a lawyer, just one of the folks gathering documents. The company got an unexpected demand letter claiming we provided a defective piece of equipment and wanted big bucks for the cost of repair and all the downtime it caused. Our in-house lawyer immediately thought something was up. Letters like that are never out of the blue. They're always preceded by phone calls and emails, and he always got looped in on those. So when he called me up to have the document preservation chat, he also wanted me to pull and print all the emails ASAP. There weren't many, maybe 30 mentioning the company. 22 were from the company, and all of them, save 3, were from when they bought the machine over a year before. The last email was the only one I actually printed, and I decided to deliver it myself with one line highlighted. Machine was surprisingly intact for being hit by a motorcycle going that fast. I had never seen our company lawyer smile nor laugh, but he was doing both as soon as he read it. Story 10. Acted as my own lawyer in small claims court. A cleaning lady I found on Angie's list grabbed the wrong spray bottle to clean a built-in cabinet behind our new couch. The spray bottle had bleach. All of the bleach mist settled and left white spots all over the couch. I thought the whole point of Angie's List was that you were getting insured professionals, but no, they didn't have insurance. I filed for a small claim because they started to deny everything once I told them my protection plan on the couch didn't cover bleach stains, and I showed them the invoice to replace the upholstery. Their argument suddenly went from, yes, I'll pay the deductible for the protection plan, to, it was like that when I got there. I started to get everything ready, took pictures and videos of all the bleach spots, printed out our text conversations. For a while, I wasn't sure if I was going to win it because it may have boiled down to her word against mine. Then it hit me to look through my old photos and bam! I had taken a picture of my dog a week or two prior sitting on the couch right by the built-in cabinet that clearly showed no bleach stains. So yeah, I won. On another note, if she had just admitted it to me and apologized, I would have given her a break or only asked for half the cost or something. Even still, I couldn't help but feel bad for her. Until she told her side of the story in court. I was perfectly calm and nice when I found out they bleached my couch, and she told the judge I was screaming at her. After that, I was all business. Judge ruled in my favor. I told him to subtract the cost of the cleaning services from the invoice, because she gave me back the check I wrote after finding the bleach stains. But technically, they did clean my house and I wanted our business to be fully settled. We stepped out and she wrote me the check. Story 11. Not my lawyer, but during my post-divorce hearing for child placement, my ex-wife spent around 8 hours on the stand tearing me apart, spread over 4 days. She claimed that I was a rapist, that I was abused, that I was an absolutely garbage human being. There were a few moments when I knew that I had won the case. So at the tail end of 8 hours of outright distortions and lies, her attorney asks her what she wants for the placement schedule. She gives an entirely different placement schedule from at the beginning of her testimony that gives me more time. I'm incredulous because if I'm that terrible of a human being, why does she want the kids to have more time? But the coup de grace that she fell right into is when finally at the end of her testimony, my attorney pins her down on the real reason she doesn't want my daughter to have an overnight stay with me. My daughter was 3 and had never once stayed overnight. And after all these claims of abuse, you would expect a doozy, right? Instead, my ex says something to the effect that she's too young and won't understand that when mommy leaves, that mommy is coming back. Basically, object permanence. So the judge asks, so I have a question. When she goes to daycare, does she like being separated from her brother? My son? Oh, no she doesn't. So does she cry? Yes, she cries. So, he says, is she upset that he's not coming back? Or just because she misses her brother? Oh, she knows that he's coming back, says my ex-wife. She just misses him. Right away, I saw what happened. In the span of about 20 minutes, she destroyed her argument that I'm abused and destroyed her argument that my daughter lacked the object permanence necessary to stay with me. I could have flown. I won my case. Story 12. I own a restaurant bar, and we had a young rookie police officer hovering next door 3 to 4 nights a week towards close, and he was pulling everyone over for failure to make a complete stop. Obviously, most of the people were guilty of a rolling stop. Most people got a warning, but he was trolling for DUIs. One night, we saw him parked across the street, and my friend was leaving, so I went out and stood there as a witness that he came to a full complete stop, in case he got pulled over. The officer saw me standing there, and my friend came to a complete stop. Like a really good complete stop. I walked away after my friend was out of sight. The next day, my friend said that he had got pulled over after I walked away and had blown a .09 DUI. The point of this story is that when I was called as a witness at trial, the officer and my versions of the story were absolutely the opposite. When I was dismissed by the district attorney, I asked if I could make a statement. The district attorney objected, but the judge allowed it. So I said, so if I testify that insert friend's name came to a full and complete stop, and the officer says it was a rolling stop, then one of us is committing perjury. And I'm confident that I am not committing perjury. The courtroom grew a little loud with chatter. We were dismissed. The officer resigned a short while after that. Turns out, as a rookie, he had a ranking officer that was a bad egg, riding shotgun, and made him make the traffic stop regardless of a probable cause. Poor guy getting a tainted reputation from a bad senior officer. Story 13. Worked with lawyers and heard many stories. Here is my favorite one. Now, I will admit, I actually felt bad that this guy got away with what he did. I in no way condone what the defendant's actions were and feel he should have been punished. So here is the story. Client was driving intoxicated after a night out of town. He was pulled over by the County A's police department just over the border of County B. Client blew a .20 BAC and had meth and weed on him in addition to his speeding ticket, reckless driving, and no proof of insurance. Client was booked and processed in County A's court. The client retained his lawyer. His lawyer reviewed the case carefully and went to County A DA court he said he went to. He said he wanted to enter a guilty plea in on the no-proof insurance. The client did have insurance, he just didn't have the proof on him at the time. Naturally, the court accepted the plea and asked what about the other charges. Lawyer said, I would like to go to court on those. DA said, all right. A week later, the lawyer called up the County A clerk and said my client was arrested in County B. Shouldn't that mean he's tried in County B, since it was his jurisdiction? County A agreed that since the client was arrested in County B, he should go to County B court. A court date at County B comes up. The court asks my lawyer to enter his plea. Lawyer states that his client has already pleaded guilty in regards to this case, the no insurance, and that he can't be tried twice under double jeopardy. The court agreed since my client had entered a guilty plea already, that it wasn't legal to try him again, and the client's punishment was provide proof that he had insurance at the time of the incident, pay a $40 fine. Story 14. I had a client who had a pretty severe slip and fall in a pharmacy. In my state, we are not allowed to see surveillance of the subject until after the deposition or other similar testimony is taken. The rule is in place to protect defendants so we don't coach the client based on what we see in the video. Anyway, we take the deposition, then they send the video. Not 30 minutes later, I get a call from opposing counsel wanting to settle. The video revealed that my client had fallen, passed out, and peed herself. She was very elderly and very hurt. The manager of the store had an employee put signs out showing wet floors and mopping up around the lady, all while she was unconscious, all before calling 911. Settled that one for the policy limits right there. Story 15. I was defending a company being sued for kicking a customer out for being drunk. He showed up to trial, small claims, wasted at 10 a.m. The judges in small claims are lenient on the process. They like to adjudicate on merits. So we started. He's the plaintiff, so he goes first. Can barely stand during his opening statement. Knocks over his shopping bag full of evidence. Just awful. The court put a stop to it and ruled in my client's favor. The only words I spoke were putting my name on the record.
Lawyers, has there ever been a time the opposing counsel accidentally proved your case for you? And what happened? Story 1. I had a hearing where the opposing party offered an updated contract that my client supposedly signed, except it was a horrible copy and barely readable. Then he assured the judge that the new contract was exactly the same as the old contract, except for the party name at the top. The original contract was in his mom's name, the new one in his name, and the date of the contract itself. He made that assurance multiple times. After he exhausted himself saying how everything was the same, I then pointed out to the judge that half the provisions were different and that my client had never signed that form. The judge asked if we were really accusing him of forging my client's signature since that's a serious accusation. I held up the guy's prior conviction for contract fraud and said, I absolutely am, Your Honor. We won, hands down, no further argument is needed. Story 2. Not a lawyer, I once had an individual accuse me of HIPAA violation. Sat at a meeting with hospital folks ready to give me a talk before the case moves forward. She started small talk and I said, can we please get to the matters at hand? Then she starts blah 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 HIPAA blah blah blah. Me. Thank you. I fully understand the gravity of the accusation. Can you specifically outline why I cannot share this information with the said individual? Then she starts reciting bullshit hospital policy. I cut her mid-sentence and said, here is the document that the patient signed that specifically outlines my ability to share this information with said personnel. Amazingly, how 3 checkpoints failed to look at the damn document, and there I was sitting in a meeting wasting time. She let me walk out after that and told me that she'd take care of the situation. Felt like a total boss. Story 3. My dad's ex-girlfriend took us to court over his estate after he kicked her out. Her claim was that she was entitled to half the pie due to the de facto marriage. Our claim was that she was a gold-digging whore who planned it from the very beginning. She had mountains of evidence of her contribution to Dad's company in running the private estate. Expense reports, receipts, dates, and times she and Dad approved their relationship with trips and combined spending, etc. She had so much evidence the judge took 4 days to look it all over, after which he came back and said, "Why the hell would you have all of this if this wasn't your plan the whole time?" The case was very downhill from there. Some more clarification. She'd done the same thing to her ex-husband, giving precedent. He and her children said so in their testimonies. One of her children even inadvertently admitted she'd told them what to say and paid them for it. We were able to name the date the relationship between her and my dad ended, which was months before she claimed and outside the time limit to make it a de facto common law marriage. We even had testimony from the doctor at his ICU who said she tried to keep everyone, including his ex-wife, our mother, and us, his children, away from him. Meanwhile, she had his phone and computer and was trying to take over his contacts and business. We had proof of this. Her lawyer was a moron who constantly contradicted himself and the evidence. He lost documents, gave incorrect dates, and asked irrelevant questions of the defense. In the end, it was that her expenses for the relationship were deemed normal for anyone in any kind of romantic relationship, that gifts and meals aren't claimable for compensation, that her contributions to the household and business were not sufficient to warrant compensation, she never actually put any money into anything either, and that the relationship was not sufficient in duration to qualify as a common law marriage. This case took 4 years to settle, including 2 elevations of appeals. She finally gave up because she'd run into about $250,000 of court fee debt, as well as being forced to pay us $40,000. Story 4. I had a misdemeanor possession case I was defending. The client was driving his mom's car. He gets pulled over for playing the stereo too loud. Then there are pills in the center console and a prescription pill bottle. The bottle has his mom's name on it. The client gets arrested and charged with possession of a controlled substance without a prescription. The case is obviously bullshit, but the dumbest DA I'd ever met in my life won't dismiss it, and we go to trial. During closing arguments, the DA says, "This case is a circumstantial evidence case." During my closing, I slap the jury instruction on the projector that says if a case is based on circumstantial evidence, and there is one factual scenario that points to guilt and one that points to innocence, the jury must find in favor of the defendant and acquit. My client was acquitted. Story 5. Not a lawyer, but was taken to court once. A guy had taken my family to court basically because he had been dating my mother and things ended, So he then takes us to small claims court with an itemized list of everything he'd ever bought for the entire family. Every cheeseburger, every Kit Kat. He even billed for things he did like house repairs. Some of the repairs were terrible and ruined other things. He tried to unclog the sink and ended up destroying the main drain pipe for the house. Now, he had bought some more expensive things as well. No one asked him to, but he was one of the types that loved to show how much money he had and would always talk about his connections and would name drop someone anytime we went anywhere. So when he takes us to court with his full itemized list, the judge asks him to go first and present his testimony. He basically says, "While I was with them, I bought all this stuff, I took them to dinner all the time and all this, but it was the idea it would be paid back by them." Judge, you bought a child a birthday cake with the idea it would be paid back? Did you ever say that these things were loans and not gifts? Him, well, no, but I shouldn't need to, that's the normal way people think. Judge, well, that's not the way I'd think. Case dismissed. Well, Jimmy, happy birthday. Here is the BMX bike you wanted. Just remember that when you turn 18, you're going to owe me $300 with compounded interest on a monthly basis. Story 6. Not a lawyer, but took my brother-in-law's landlord to small claims court. He's on SSI and I'm his conservator. We sued her for over $4,000 after she just decided she didn't like him and changed the locks on his apartment door. She also stuffed all of his belongings into trash bags and dragged them out to the curb. This was all done the day before she cashed his rent check. It all started because she was letting herself into his apartment with no notice and was going through his stuff while he was gone. When I found out about this, I told him to let her know that was not okay. He did, and that's why she kicked him out. I'm very organized and presented the judge with a folder containing photos, receipts, short videos on DVD, and the sheriff call logs, as well as a concise timeline of events. The landlord showed up with her son and countersued for the same exact amount we were suing them for, claiming that the apartment was trash, there were holes in the walls, and they would have to repair everything before being able to rent again. During the hearing, the judge asked for evidence of the damage to the room. The son whipped out his cell phone and showed a video panning and walking around the room. The video showed my brother-in-law's apartment obviously still being lived in. His stuff was all still there, and no visible damage, but there were a lot of posters and things hung on the walls. When the judge looked at the video, he asked, "Where's the damage?" The son replied, "You can't see it, it's behind all of the posters." The judge frowns and looks at the video again and then says, "Did you take this video when he was still living there at this time?" The son replies, "Yes," and this was the clincher. The judge then asked, "Did you ask his permission to enter the apartment to take this video?" Silence. We were awarded the full amount. Story 7. I had to go to court over a financial cock-up when I was a student. Took advice from the university legal support team, who said I didn't need a solicitor, so I went in alone. The judge didn't like this and postponed it for another date so I could prove I'd had more counsel first. The other party's solicitor caught me outside the court and said, "I didn't tell you this, but," and pointed out a huge error in the financial paperwork that made it very obviously come out in my favor. Went back to legal support, got confirmation that it was right, went to the second hearing alone, and got the entire thing thrown out. The other solicitor winked at me as he left. Saved me about £9,000. Nice chap. Story 8. Not a lawyer, but a relative of a retired prosecutor. The relative was working in a misdemeanor criminal court. Cases always get called in alphabetical order, and two women named Catherine Smith and Catherine Smith were scheduled to have their hearings before the judge. Not their actual names, but you get the point. Both had similar crimes, but were slightly different. So the bailiff announces the next case to the courtroom. Catherine Smith for one count of possession of cocaine with the intention to sell and one count of prostitution. So Catherine Smith stands up and indignantly cries, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, just wait a second. Where the hell did the prostitution charge come from? I may deal crack, but I'm not a whore." Easiest drug dealing case my relative ever prosecuted. In her defense, she did not state that she does or did sell crack, just that she may, but she's no hoe faux show. Story 9. Actual lawyer here from the Fool for a Client file. Was interning at legal services after first year doing discovery work for family law. My supervisor invited us to observe a hearing for a client to get a restraining order against her husband. At the hearing, the client discussed various times he threatened her. The man, representing himself, interrupted and said, "Judge, I never said any of those things. If I had, she wouldn't be standing here. Restraining order granted. Let me just threaten my wife in front of her lawyers and this judge right here, right?" Story 10. Not a lawyer, but here's a story from the burbs. My buddy is in the middle of a situation like that right now. His psycho neighbor built a wall too high and doesn't have proper drainage on his property for the very small creek natural drainage in between their yards. My buddy hired an attorney as the psycho decided to sue him over it. My buddy's engineer that looked over the property noted not only did my buddy set up his yard right, but the neighbor created drainage problems. A neighbor hired his own engineer, which proved my buddy was correct. Now the guy is likely to go postal. The case was going to go to mediation. Since both engineers found fault with the psycho neighbor, my buddy decided he was going to take it to trial. Turn the tables a bit. Story 11. I'm not a lawyer, but witnessed a pathologist win a case in court by destroying the defense's credibility. Now the question was over whether or not carbon monoxide poisoning could have caused certain signs of death in an individual. But the defense didn't study the chemistry very well and kept asking the pathologist whether carbon dioxide could have caused these signs. After thoroughly frustrating the defense by answering his questions incorrectly, the pathologist said very loudly, "Oh, I'm sorry, did you mean carbon monoxide? Because that's a completely different thing." Completely destroyed the defense's credibility in front of the jury. They were done after that. So I guess the opposing counsel screwed himself by not picking up a book. This is not the only reason that the lawyer didn't win, though. There were a lot of other things that didn't work out in his favor, but those were technical things that he probably knew about ahead of time. This was a case where he was asking a question that he thought was going to work out in his favor, but it worked against him because he made a basic chemistry mistake that he honestly should have caught. Yeah, I know he's not a scientist, but you don't have to be a scientist to remember the difference between those two things. Getting terminology correct is part of his job. It's not like anyone caught a felony charge solely because he said that one thing wrong. Story 12. Actual lawyer here, and this one was especially sweet. Was involved in an ownership control dispute of a Venezuelan company. While we had no doubt who controlled the company, opposing counsel had created enough smoke to create just enough doubt for our federal judge to order us to file a declaratory action. After a few months, we received the equivalent of a declaratory order from the high courts in Venezuela, basically saying our client was in control of the company. We had the order translated and certified and drafted a motion explaining to the court how these orders from Venezuela work and how they are in effect the highest law of the land, which meant the case should be over and our client was in control. Opposing counsel drafted an almost identical motion, but they had not received a copy of the newest order. In other words, opposing counsel agreed with our position that these orders from Venezuela would definitely prove who controlled the company, but attached the older order. We prevailed in the declaratory action, and the judge referenced the fact both sides had the same argument in the final order. Some background. The original Venezuelan High Court order, the first order, created the equivalent of receivership in the company we were representing. The receivership hired us to pursue an unrelated claim here in the States against an American company. The receivership was put in place by the shareholders, and the Venezuelan government, as the owner of the Venezuelan company Douchebag, was embezzling money and running the company into the ground. There was another firm representing the company before we were hired, and they decided to ignore the first order and claim to the federal court here in Miami that they were the only ones representing the company and that we were the imposters. They argued that the first order was not valid and Douchebag was still in control of the company. There was a second order that was the result of an appeal in Venezuela that was very ambiguous in its language and cast some doubt as to the control of the company. Douchebag and his attorney submitted the first and second orders as support to their motion. A third order was issued by a different Venezuelan appeals court, which put the issue to rest. We asked for and received a copy of it. They did not either because they knew it was not supportive of their position or because they dropped the ball. We believed it to be the latter. Our motion cited similar case law and advanced the same positions, but were interpreting different orders. Story 13. A guy I used to work with was going through a messy divorce, about 20 years ago now. His soon-to-be ex-wife was a psycho and her father was a psychologist, so he was pulling all of the strings. Even had my coworker arrested at work one day. Bullshit charges. The divorce case took years, one young son involved, and at every turn my friend lost because of something the father filed or another string he pulled. In the end, they were in court and it was very apparent that my friend was going to lose custody and all visitation rights. Every plea he entered was squashed and he was mentally broken. The judge asked the ex-wife if she had anything else to add, and she said she had a written statement that she wanted the judge to read. The bailiff took the paper from her and handed it to the judge, who unfolded the note and read it. He stopped for a minute and asked her if she was certain she wanted this note added to the case, and she said yes. The judge turns to my friend and says, paraphrasing, "Mr. Hanks, all these years and all these claims that are ruled against you, the court profusely apologizes. I did not believe you, but now I do. Ruling in your favor, bangs the gavel. I grant you full legal and physical custody of your minor child. Bailiff, please handcuff Miss Saunders." My buddy was stunned that he won and happy at the same time. He later found out that the note said, "Give me my son or I'll kill you." Story 14. Not a lawyer, but I am a certified paralegal. I went to court and spoke for a friend at a hearing. I can ask questions to both parties and address the judge. The only thing I can't do is object to the other lawyer's line of questioning, so here's what happened. My best male friend was fighting a restraining order against him by his crazy ex-girlfriend. Everyone is in the courtroom that day, including her. Her lawyer questioned my best friend about their relationship. As an aside, they lived together, he moved out and got his own place, but they were still together. She just got obsessively crazier to the point where they broke up. She wanted some stuff back that she gifted him and he refused to let her in while not home to get it. She got crazy angry and made a scene in his front yard, getting cops called and the neighbor's dog taken for being a pit bull in a park where they were not allowed. Bullshit, I know. Next thing you know, she's got a restraining order on his mom, who lived right next door to her son, and is trying to get one on him and sue him for his shit back. So when he's on the stand, I'm questioning him about the incident about her showing up and trying to break in. His mother called him the moment she saw her banging on the door, so he beat the police there. She had gotten in and was in the living room. I asked him if he was in fear of her, and he says absolutely, because upon walking in, she slid an iron bar from her sweatshirt sleeve, telling him to back off. He was just standing there, mouth open wide and shocked. Cue her turn on the stand. I asked her about the day and if she had gotten in. She insisted she did it via a key, which we knew was a lie. She never had a key. So then I asked her about the iron bar. Why did you have it? Where did it come from? My cop friend gave it to me to protect myself while driving from road rage. It's in my car all the time, so I just brought it with me in case anyone was inside that wanted to mess with me. And did you have it up your sleeve? Yeah, 'cause I didn't want neighbors to think I was breaking stuff. She was bawling and slamming her fists into her thighs and pulling her own hair, wailing. I rested after that. She admitted to trespassing while carrying a concealed weapon. Both restraining orders were rescinded. She asked to stay after the court was adjourned, and the judge handed her mandatory therapy and committed her for observation. F*** you, Shauna. Wow, at both times, ouch, and f*** Shauna. Story 15. When I first started, my firm had me on a case where the client claimed he lost because of ineffective assistance from counsel, basically saying that the old lawyer didn't do his job. So we prepare an argument based on not asking the right questions, not communicating, etc. We think it's going to be a tough case, but not unwinnable. Then we get the response to our complaint where the old lawyer argues that he was only ineffective because he didn't have time to prepare for the case and only reviewed it for the morning of the original trial. He had known about the case for months, by the way. The judge saw this, and during the trial, we had essentially asked, isn't this the definition of ineffective counsel, not giving enough time to your client? The silence from his side of the court was amazing. Needless to say, the trial didn't last much longer than that. Thanks, opposing counsel. I guess you were ineffective for both of you. Story 16. I'm a lawyer, but this time was from my time as a law clerk. A tattoo artist, around 40, gets charged with the rape of an employee. The victim is 17, very fragile, and barely able to sit in the same room as the defendant. She stares at the table the entire time, and you are barely able to hear her speak. She does not elaborate much on details, but basically, he forced himself on her after closing the shop for the day. The defendant's story is that the employee came on to him and that the sex was consensual. The defense calls a witness, another employee at the same shop, to basically tell everyone what a stand-up guy the defendant was. If I were to guess, I think the court was undecided, but maybe leaning toward a not guilty verdict up until this point. The defense witness takes a stand and starts telling a story of how the defendant, while doing a tattoo on her, tried to hold her down and kiss her, but had to stop because someone else came into the shop. Game over. Perp got convicted of rape, and a week later he declared that he was satisfied with the penalty and chose not to appeal. Story 17. Not a lawyer, but I am a former insurance fraud investigator. We were at a hearing before the WCB, the Workers' Compensation Board. I had something like 18 hours of video spread over a 2-week period of a claimant doing roofing work. The problem, for me, was that the video didn't get a clear face shot. Normally, what we like to do was get in close, show the face for positive identification, and then zoom out. Bonus if the claimant was wearing distinctive clothing that could easily be tied to him. Because of where this guy lived, all I could do was show someone who matched his description getting out of a truck registered to him every morning. He wore a hat, he had a beard, and had neither at the hearing. So the company lawyer is prepping me and basically letting me know to be on point because the claimant's attorney is almost certainly going to challenge the fact that it was his client in the video. If the video got tossed, the case was lost. But about 2 minutes into the hearing, the claimant's attorney agrees to stipulate to the fact that it is his client in all the videos. All of it. Our attorney was shocked. That was pretty much the only leg he had to stand on. The claimant attorney was incredibly smug right after this, like it was no big deal. Evidently, his strategy was to show that his client wasn't really a professional roofer since he was doing the roof the wrong way. He tried to get me to answer questions about roofing, but I refused as it was beyond the scope of my work, and he just wouldn't let it go. About an hour of back and forth over this, the judge finally said, "Counselor, it doesn't matter if your client is doing the work well. What matters is that he has stated numerous times and under oath that he cannot work. Whether he's doing it for free, for cash, or for fun has no bearing on the fact that he's doing roofing work while collecting compensation benefits, which was awarded because he couldn't do roofing work." The guy lost and had to repay a bunch of benefits. After a few of those hearings, I began formulating a list of lawyers I would never hire and ones I would absolutely want on my side.